Hello and welcome to the show that teaches you the things your parents and teachers are too afraid to. The Helios blog. Today, Piers Morgan and Jordan Peterson. Time for another debate.
The reason she's alone is because she's difficult.
Women are not accepting the bare minimum.
Women fuck men they respect.
All the women who say things like, I'm strong, independent, I don't need no man, like, y'all impress me.
Women just gaslight each other and say what they want to hear.
What you've gleaned about it, read about it, heard about it, it mentions the word patriarchy, I think, a dozen times or something.
Oh, yeah, patriarchy.
There's no doubt the whole theme of the thing is that, you don't really need men anymore.
This is a reference to the Barbie movie.
More women, you can have everything you want without these ghastly people, and we need to completely dismantle the whole patriarchy and have a matriarchy, right, where women run everything and particularly
We already have that.
run beastly men. I mean, this war on the patriarchy. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would say the online world in many ways is a matriarchy. And the reason I would say that is because the online world enables female form antisocial behavior.
Indeed.
And females who are antisocial use reputation savaging, bullying, and exclusion to gain their narcissistic pathway forward. There's a very well documented psychiatric literature on female antisocial behavior, and the online world has many of the elements of a matriarchy. And so, yeah, well, there's the matriarchy for you. And I mean, I'm not saying it would be worse or better than the patriarchy, although the patriarchy it's a foolish concept to begin with because it's such a radical oversimplification. But the idea that if we just replaced a hierarchy of men with a hierarchy of women, or no hierarchy at all, I mean, if you think that, you're so foolish that you should be put in university and educated.
Indeed, except university nowadays doesn't educate anymore. It's a training camp for womanist, wokist religion. Effectively, going to university for a lot of programs is just what? Going to church.
Educated by people who know what they're talking about. Of course, we can't do that in the universities anymore either. So
it was extraordinary on universities that Harvard University, I think, has just been voted the worst in the world for free speech. It almost like it doesn't exist at Harvard. Worst in America, I think it was. I mean, how can it be that Harvard has become this barometer of the enemy of free speech?
Because you infiltrate the institutions from the top down. That's why. So you go to the place where people are supposed to be educated and you corrupt it, and down and down and down it goes, right?
Well, it took a lot of work to manage that. It took decades of something approximating foolish conspiratorial maneuvering to manage that. I mean, you got to ask yourself, is Harvard a university or a hedge fund? I mean, as a massive endowment, it seems to me very often that the university is just a sideshow for the people who govern the Harvard's economic affairs. But that aside, it's taken a very long time to let the woke mob and the progressive propagandists take over the university systems, and Harvard's in the forefront, and so they managed it a little earlier and a little better. And I say that, by the way, with absolutely no satisfaction. I worked at Harvard in the 90s. I was a professor.
Now imagine, it's exactly like I said. Imagine living in this time period and having even been in your prime in the golden age, and as you get older, seeing your whole civilization crumble around you. That's literally what's happening. That's literally what's happening. Disaster.
Professor there from 92 to 97, and I loved it. And it was one high-functioning institute at that time, man. It really, really valued excellence, and it just didn't talk about that. It actually did it, and I loved being there. The students were great. The professors were great. I really liked my colleagues. It was an admirable place, and I still have colleagues there, and they've told me straight out that it's
a disaster.
Get to say what they think. The bureaucracy has taken over the institution. The inmate.
Kind of like what happened with Jordan himself, right? When he talked about the guy, the leader of his country, and bam, suddenly, oh, we need to take away your psychology license because these two things are related, Utterly ridiculous hogwash.
Inmates run the asylum. The professors are terrified too. I've had professors from the Kennedy School tell me this too, that they can't say what they think anymore. And so when you let the second raters and the pretenders in, and you let them whine about victimization and oppression, and you let them usurp the appropriate function of the university, you get exactly what you deserve.
Yup, which is a failed institution. And arguably, that's what has happened in the West at the highest levels, right? Of bureaucracy. It's just rotted. I believe there's actually a term for this. Corruption. It's literally called corruption. Which, if you're wondering, what is the other term? Right? What is the other meaning? Well, corruption is used to describe a disease that's progressive and is destroying the thing from the inside, right? It's like, you imagine a cabbage and it's rotting from the inside. You could call that a corruption of the cabbage, right? That's literally what is happening to the West. Corruption. And I don't mean, bribery a la Escobar like it used to be. No. This is, follow our religion, you heathen. And if you don't follow it, we'll destroy you. It's literally the Spanish Inquisition. 1984.
And that's exactly what happened at Harvard. And it's still happening. It's not improving. I can't really see how it will. I think that to flip the universities, you'd have to do to them what Musk did to Twitter, which is to fire 90% of the people who work there.
Yeah.
And that's just not going to happen. So,
I think
wait for them to die. The culture shifts and the next generation takes over and they're not woke and idiots. Or not. Maybe that's just wishful thinking.
It's ridiculous.
I started a new university with my daughter. So
right, I'm going to come to that.
Redress it that way.
When Michaela joins us, we're going to talk about that university. I want to on the university, I remember one recent case. It was a professor who for 25 years had given a lecture in the use of offensive language. And as part of the lecture, he used offensive language. And he got...
How dare you?
...cancelled for using offensive language.
You literally can't make this crap up. Like, it's so idiotic. It's almost like... Have you guys heard of The Onion? It's like a joke newspaper that makes joke headlines, right? And they're like, they're all satirical, right? But this is like not The Onion. It's like so stupid as to make one think that it's satirical, but it's actually not satirical. It's ridiculous.
Language. And at that point, I realized that parody was dead. Right? Everything was dead. I mean, in that moment, you couldn't parody that.
I mean, if you can't have satire and comedy, what do you have? You have zero free speech at that point.
A professor teaching how to use offensive language, using examples of offensive language, then is deemed to have offended students so much that he has to get cancelled and lose his job. I mean, completely insane.
For 25 years.
Yeah, well, welcome to the land ruled by the evil clown. You know that he has ascendance, so to speak, when, as you pointed out, you can't parody it. It's gone to the point where it's its own parody.
Who rules you? The person that you can't criticize.
And I see that happening all over. And part of the way you deal with that, and I mean this most seriously, is you deal with that with a positive sense of humor. And I can do that when I'm not ill, and I'm feeling much better even than I did last year when we were talking. And so I can handle it with a bit of a sense of humor now, and you need to do that. If you lose your sense of humor, in some ways you've been defeated if you lose your sense of humor.
I completely agree.
And
if we don't continue to laugh, then these joyless, soulless, woke wastrels win, because they are joyless. They don't laugh at anything. They are offended by absolutely
no, and they don't like
everything.
Comedians.
Yeah, they find comedy offensive. Well, the moment people find comedy offensive, I find them so offensive, I want nothing to do with them.
Yeah, because you're an idiot. Because you don't understand even the principle behind what it is you're criticizing.
You can tell the tyrants, they hate two things. They hate comedians and they hate cars.
That's funny.
That's so true. It's so true.
Yeah, you got to tax the cars.
I want to talk to you about your new
tax the carbon
book, We Who Wrestle with God.
Yep.
A lot of your fans, there's all sorts of Jordan Peterson groups that you can join who debate whether you really believe in God or not. So let's just get it on the table. Do you believe in God?
Here we go. Okay, let's skip this crap.
I'm just afraid of different things than the people who lie. And I'm afraid, for example, of what happens when you lose control of your tongue. And I said that back in 2016 when I first opposed the Canadian government. And people were, congratulating me. It's like, well, you're so brave to stand up to the government. It's like, I'm nowhere near as afraid of the government as I am of what happens when people lose control of their tongue. I studied totalitarianism since I was 13 years old, in depth. And I know what happens when people lose control of their tongue. What happens is everything goes to hell. And I mean that metaphysically. I might even mean it theologically, but you can just say, don't even bother with that.
But what's fascinating...
Let's just mean it practically.
But what's interesting is, I completely agree with you, by the way, and you are the most open book of almost anyone I've ever interviewed, right to the point I asked you if you believe in God. I didn't actually know what you were going to say, but for some reason you're reluctant to say. Why are you reluctant?
Well, okay, let's walk along that. Well, because it's not a well-posed question. It's too complicated an issue to be dealt with like that. You step into instant traps just by accepting the question. So I'll show you what I mean. So the first thing I would say is, what do you mean by believe? Like, do you think that a statement about the existence of God is something like a scientific theory? Do you think it's a list of facts? Is it a factual question? Does God exist or not? Is it a factual question like you're asking about whether a cup on a table exists, or a plate on a table, an artifact in a room? What do you mean by this? What do you mean by believe? I'll stake my life on the proposition that God exists. How's that?
Well,
is that an answer? Because that's the right answer.
I would ask you, here's my supplementary. Do you ever pray?
Always.
Who do you pray to?
The spirit that protects you from hell.
But that, many people would say, is God.
Hey, sounds good to me. And so you might say, well, I said I pray always. So what does that mean? I'm trying to say the clearest words I can say. And I do that by paying attention. I'm listening to the words and feeling them as I move along, thinking, is that a firm foundation in the morass? Is that a bridge over the abyss? Is that word the right word? I do that when I'm writing. I do that when I'm talking. And I do that because I don't want to be in the abyss. And the pathway over the abyss is the truth. Now, with regards to belief in God, you might say, and I know that you're not particularly religiously inclined, at least that's the theory. It's like, well, you have a character, Piers. Everyone has a character. You could say that would be the spirit of Piers Morgan. And then we might say, well, let's inquire into that spirit. If you were a hedonist, then the spirit that would be Piers Morgan would be your hedonistic whims. And that would be your God. I would say if you're a noble person, then your spirit is something elevated above your mere whims. And then there's a spirit that's inculcated within you. It's a consequence, perhaps, of your socialization, but in a more sophisticated way, it's actually a consequence of the spirit that you've allowed as a consequence of your choices to dwell within you. And that spirit has a nature. It might be allied with the truth. It might be allied with falsehood. If it's allied with the truth, it's a manifestation of what has been considered traditionally the logos. The more you're aligned with the truth, the more your spirit is an avatar of the logos. And that's just, it's true. It's religiously true, as it turns out, but it's also technically true. It's technically true.
See, I had a debate.
And so I'm making that case in the new book.
Right. So I had a debate with Richard Dawkins about this, who was a bit disingenuous with me because he sat with me for a whole show, seemed to enjoy it, thanked me very much for it, and then called me a fool afterwards in some podcast. So
disaster.
I know you've had a few run-ins with him, and it doesn't surprise me. But what I said to Dawkins was, because I was raised a Catholic, I was given spiritual guidance for several years by Catholic nuns, and I do believe in God. And the reason I said to him is that no human brain can really explain to me, or anybody, what was there before nothing. So if you believe in a Big Bang Theory, well, what was there before that?
Yeah, it's very, very complicated question. And actually, listening to some physics lectures and all that, I've heard some theories on it, and it's not so like hard to justify a creator, really.
Because I don't think any human brain has that power to explain or answer that question. To me, it makes perfect sense. There should be some being, entity, something which is superior to a human brain.
I believe that.
And I would think that someone with your brain would think that too, because there are questions we simply can't answer.
Okay, three things about that. So the first is, that's the argument by design, that things are so complex and sophisticated that cries out for the hypothesis of something like a creator. I'm not a big fan of the argument by design. I can see its advantages, but it isn't the primary argument as far as I'm concerned. So the Big Bang proponents have a problem, because it's a tenet of the Big Bang theory that the laws of physics themselves break down at the point of the singularity, and that would be the point just before the Big Bang. And when you say the laws of physics, the existence of space and time even is unknowable prior to the Big Bang, you're basically positing a miracle at the beginning of existence. And so if you get to have your miracle, there's no reason the religious types can't have theirs.
Well, exactly.
You might argue about what the miracle needs to be, and I think that's an argument that has to be had. I don't like the argument by design. I like the argument by conscience better. So the argument by conscience, which is another string of classic theological thought, is that something dwells within you that aligns you with the spirit of reality. And it's the still small voice within that was identified first by the prophet Elijah. And it was part of a transformation in the religious viewpoint in historical terms that moved the notion of God from something like Baal, B-A-A-L, a nature god, the god of storms and earthquakes, of what would you say, remarkable and awe-inspiring natural phenomena, to the voice within that can, if you attend to it, align you with the structure of reality itself, that internal voice being a manifestation of God. And I think that's an extremely powerful argument, and I think it's right. And I'll tell you something about Dawkins' work that's very interesting. So Dawkins has pointed out that an organism has to be a microcosm of its environment in order to survive. And I would say the voice of conscience within us is the most unerring manifestation of the microcosm within. And I think you can make an extraordinarily powerful biological case for that, and I've done that in this new book. So I think Dawkins' argument invalidates his epistemology.
Yeah, I agree.
I really believe that.
But what do you think? I mean, you've had moments in your life in recent years where I would imagine you have faced the prospect of potentially dying. And in those moments, what have you felt, and what do you think happens to you? If you do die, or you had died, what did you imagine might happen to you?
Well, I had lots of moments, years in the last few years where dying would have been an absolute relief. And had that been accompanied by the complete cessation of my being, I would have been perfectly content with that. There are things that are far worse than dying.
Precisely.
So if you're only terrified of dying, you've hardly begun to plumb the depths of existential catastrophe.
Death is fairly...
You just don't have an imagination.
What could be worse than dying?
A lot of things.
Being a prison guard at Auschwitz?
But you'd still be alive, even if you were witnessing horror. Is not death the
ultimate...
Oh, no.
I'm thinking perpetrating it.
Right. You mean...
How about being an Auschwitz guard? How about being an Auschwitz guard who really enjoyed his job? How about that? That's worse than death, as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
I mean that.
No, I see that.
That's hell, man.
Yeah, it's a living hell.
That's hell.
Yeah, I agree.
You are the demon, effectively, at that point.
But do you think think there's an actual hell, Jordan? Is there somewhere that people like that go to, which is hell?
Oh, definitely. Now, what relationship that has to what happens to you when you die, I have no idea. I mean, I don't think anybody's in a position to speak about what's truly beyond our ken, let's say. I don't think we understand consciousness at all. We don't understand time. we don't understand the relationship between finitude and the infinite landscape that surrounds us. That's all a great mystery, and I tend to leave that alone because I try not to speak about things that I can't speak about. But does hell exist? It's like, study history and see if you can figure it out for yourself.
Yeah, it takes very little studying to know that it exists. Think of the Mongol Empire, for example. And it's not hard to see.
I mean,
does heaven
there's
exist?
There's nothing that's more obvious than that hell exists.
So does heaven exist?
Mao's China was hell.
Right, but so you're talking about hell on earth, but do you believe there's a hell after death?
Like I said, I don't speculate about such things. That's where my ignorance finds its, what would you say? That's where my knowledge finds its limit. I'm concerned enough about what I'm doing right now, right here, and leaving the rest of that. And, you know, so I have to leave it at that. The hell that I see as a potential on earth is sufficient as a deterrent. And it's of sufficient reality. You know, you can ask, well, is it eternal? Well, I would say, well, look, all totalitarian states are variants on a theme, let's say, and that theme persists. All archetypal stories are eternal. Everything that happened in the Bible happened and is happening and will continue to happen forever. It's part of the eternal human story.
Yeah, I would say that's what I'm referring to when I'm referring to the Wheel of Time. You know, the history repeating itself thing.
It's hyper real, and heaven and hell are part of that. What that means in the final analysis, I don't know. I mean, I think you asked in there, you know, hell is real, is heaven real? It's like, well, heaven is as far away from hell as you can get. That's a good way of thinking about it. I've spent my whole life trying to determine how you get as far away from being a camp guard at Auschwitz who enjoys his job as possible. And one of the things I've realized in recent years, for example, is that you are far from that if you're engaging in your interactions with the world in the spirit of voluntary play. You know, and we're playing during this conversation, and Joe Rogan plays on his podcast all the time, and if you're in a playful state with your wife, your marriage is optimized, and the state of play is the opposite of tyranny. And that's why it says in the Gospels that if you want to enter the kingdom of heaven, you have to become like a little child. So you want to reinstate that open-eyed, wide-eyed acceptance of life that is the precursor to voluntary play. You want to develop your character to the point where that's part and parcel of your life on an ongoing basis. And that's allowing that spirit of the logos to inhabit you. That's another way of thinking about it. And you can certainly aid that with prayer. You know, people don't understand. People think of God as, the joke is, a cosmic butler. You pray to have your wishes granted. It's like, he's not a genie. You want to pray? It's like, pray about your stupidity. Here's a
Indeed.
prayer that'll work for sure. You want to see if prayer works? Here's one. This will work. Sit on the edge of your bed. Ask yourself, what bloody stupid thing do I continue to do that's making my life more miserable than it has to be, and everyone else's life around me, that I could give up, that I would give up? But you have to really want the answer. So you open yourself up in humility to a revelation. You'll get an answer. It won't be one you want. That's how you'll know it's true. But if you act on it, then your life will improve. And that's a proper prayer.
Yeah.
That's what you do. Like, in a metaphysical sense, the Christian insistence that you should be aware of your sins, you know, which is in a sense an existential burden, is also the idea that you should attend to your own inadequacies and admit to them, because in doing so, you open up the possibility that something better can make itself manifest within you. And there's no doubt that that's the case. That's, for sure, that's true. But you have to do it in humility. And you have to be looking. That's why you're supposed to take the mote out of your own eye instead of worrying about the beam in your neighbor's eye. It's like...
Yeah, sorry guys, I'm not commenting because I'm mesmerized by the conversation. I'm just I'm learning along with you here. Yeah. He has very interesting talking points. That's all I can really say.
There's something about you that's stupid you could fix,
Yeah.
and God will tell you what it is if you want him to, so to speak.
I want to end.
Or your wife.
I want to end this part of the interview just with you, John, before we bring your daughter in. My team were curious whether you would be able, actually physically able, to answer questions with just one-word answers, because you think about things on such a high intellectual plane. You're very articulate. You're very thoughtful about them. So I just want to throw a few questions at you and just see whether you can. I'm not saying you have to. I'm just saying, can you? Some are straightforward. Some a little bit more complex. But what's one piece of music
Very funny.
we should all listen to?
I like that he has to think about how to say just one word.
Hank Williams.
Which song? Any of them?
Which song? Lovesick Blues.
Well, the supplementary is why.
Plaintive Truth.
He answered in 2 words. All right. Let's end the video there. Hit the like, hit the sub, hit all for notifications, drop me a donation. Like Hunter M, Adrian Tom and Bobby, Dylan, Renaissance Press, and Brian, shout out to you, most recent Patreon subscriber. Thank you. Go buy my books at bit.ly/heliosbooks. My Patreon can be found at patreon.com/theheliosblog. If you'd like coaching, message me at theheliosblog@gmail.com. That's my email. I'll slot you right in. Thank you so much for listening, guys, especially if you listen to the end. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.